My issue was more the energy. I've been paying $2,100 since I first opened up. In the last 7 months, it shot up to $15,000.
What?
Yes, folks, they're in incredulous Trump here in the guy's energy bills. Like I maybe there's something going on with the energy here in the Bronx, but going from 2,000 a month to 15,000 means that maybe somebody's mining crypto. Maybe I don't know what's going on there, but Left Reckoning 191. We're talking daycare with Courtney Rawlings. Hey, Dave.
Hey, brother, how are you doing?
I'm doing good. Pretty good. I mean, all the usual caveats. I did see a funny thing about Trump that we're going to play in a bit, so I'm kind of looking forward to that. So, and we had I'm actually buoyed. Why I'm sort of incongruently happy is we sort of got out of the campaign 2024 for this upcoming conversation and had a very interesting talk about daycare with Courtney.
Not only that, not only is it about exhaustion with a certain topic too, it's just one of those things. It's like we need to think about how to get our team, our side, our movement thinking about big, bold things that we can do instead of spending all of our time worrying about what it is that the libs are up to. And I think that that's probably a big part of the exhaustion, at least on my side.
Yeah, exactly. As far as like the campaign, Kamala Harris is behind Hubert Humphrey in the important things she needs to do, and that's where we're going to leave that. But Donald Trump did a stunt this week, and I kind of want to foreground that with, let's go back to this barbershop appearance, because somebody asked a question about food that I think kind of sets the table, as it were. And Trump's answer is, amusing, if not revealing.
Is the plan to do about the food healthcare industry and getting the artificial foods banned in our urban communities that have less access to organic whole foods.
So Bobby Kennedy, right? Everybody likes Bobby, and he's so big into the health food and women things, everything. He wants to do things in the environment. And he endorsed me. First time a Kennedy's ever endorsed a Republican. Maybe it's going to be the last, but I doubt it. And he's a great guy. He would be so perfect. He doesn't like artificial foods, and he doesn't like pesticides and all the stuff they put on them. And if you listen to him for 10 minutes, I mean, he says other countries that don't do anything are healthier than us, okay? We're not that healthy, to put it mildly. So no artificial.
So now Trump's talking about banning artificial foods. I don't know if that policy initiative is going to withstand somebody telling him that, Trump, fast food is not in fact organic. They use a lot of artificial preservatives and additives in their food. And I think that's probably the end of it. It's very funny to be touting RFK's food obsessiveness when we all know who Trump is, which is a genuine fast food boy. He's a rich boy who loves fast food. So we'll see. He's not really identifying with the workers here. So the stunt was prompted by, apparently there's a Kamala Harris is somewhere, and I don't see her emphasizing this. I wish it was emphasis, even if it's
she mentioned this as like an offhand thing one time. And then the controversy, Matt, was that she had never listed it on her resume, which is a really kind of awesome.
I've seen some very funny things about this. Look, it could be she's lying about it. I think 50-50. I don't give a shit. I'll be honest. I will say, as somebody who worked at McDonald's back when minimum wage was $5.15 an hour. I'm sorry, Stephen Miller. I don't have any pay stubs from that period. Yeah. I don't have any memorabilia. And if I was running for president of the United States, I'm probably not going to tell you which one, so you can go ask my jackass general manager some questions about what he wants, what he thinks about policy this election. Fuck you is the answer to that. But again, she could be lying. It's a weird, I don't know, whatever. So Trump does this. He goes to Pennsylvania. He has somebody shut down a McDonald's for him, and he gets the fry apron on, and here's the AP's coverage of this jaunt.
I love how it starts with the plane.
I'm going
establishing.
for a job right now at McDonald's. I really wanted to do this all my life, and now I'm going to do it because she didn't do it.
Now, look, all politicians are liars. Trump is telling the truth when he says that.
Yeah. No, this is probably one of the truest things he said in a long time
on the campaign trail. I think this man genuinely loves McDonald's, and I think I can imagine, like, if you never had to work in your life, like, I'll speak. I wasn't a rich kid. The first time I got to go behind, this sounds ridiculous to put myself in this mindset, but I get to go back here and I get to watch Reno 911 in this little eating area, and I felt exclusive, right? It was the first time working a real job. I felt behind the counter. I'm like, I felt exclusive. I can imagine Trump's never felt that because he's never, like, been an employee anywhere. It's probably a little fun, make pretend. And
no, it's like the homeschooled kid when they take the SAT, right? They're like, "Oh man, it's so much fun! Like I'm hanging out with all my friends while I'm doing my work, right?"
In class. Yeah. That's a good metaphor.
I'm going for a job right now at McDonald's. I really wanted to do this all my life, and now I'm going to do it because she didn't do it.
Because she didn't do it.
I think it's good, Jordan.
Slowly, gently lowered into the oil. Don't want to burn yourself. Up, down a little bit further.
Now, this is one reason why we need to raise the minimum wage for people that even work the fries at McDonald's, which is the first place they start you. You get burned. My memory of working at McDonald's is getting burned all the fucking time. I'm getting burned by the fry popping off. I'm getting burned on the grill. Actually, you hit your elbow against the top of it or something like that. Probably not very sanitary either that happens. You're training in 16-year-olds, 17-year-olds on a grill. But yeah, you don't want to get burned. That's a good point.
Yourself. Up, down a little bit further.
It was a big part of her resume that she worked at McDonald's, how tough a job it was.
Now, Trump is undermining his whole outreach to the worker here because he keeps saying, like, how tough she said it was. Right in front, in the foreground, is the guy who had to help his old ass drop the fries, which like can be a little bit heavy. That's a very hot grease thing. You don't want to drop them in too fast. Like you're trying to get things in and out. It is difficult, but like he's like, she said it was so tough. Of course, no Republican campaign person is going to be like, hey, drop that. Stop taking a shot at this being easy.
It was a big part of her resume that she worked at McDonald's, how tough a job it was. She specifically worked at the French fry, where they make the French fries, and she talked about the heat. It was so tough. She never worked at McDonald's. McDonald's just confirmed that again, by the way. She never worked at McDonald's. In other words, she's lying Kamala. You never even touch it, huh?
Exactly.
I always wonder, wow, that's pretty good. Go like that. Watch this sucker. They look like they were. How are you? Nice to see you. That's great. Thank you, man. Thank you very much. Fantastic. Hello. This is my new baby boy. How are you? Your new baby. How are you? How are you? So this is compliments of me. Okay.
And I will say,
how long have you had it?
This location about a year. I've been an operator for 12
of course, he's not going to talk to a worker. He's going to talk to the guy who owns the fucking place, who's never fucking there. Who, like, when I worked at McDonald's, I don't remember what the guy who actually owned the place looked like. I know that he could tap into the surveillance system from home and see if you're, for instance, like leaning against the racks or whatever. And there was always a threat that he would come into the store that was used to get people to clean faster. But yeah, I'm glad he was there to tell Trump, if I've owned this place, it's turning over like what, $50,000 a month. It's nice.
Yeah. No, it is actually really nice to never have to step foot in the place while other people are toiling 24 hours a day, making you money. It is honestly, it's so funny for a lot of reasons. One, because there's a lot about this stunt that is just can be such like a layup, right? Pointing out how Trump is sort of uncomfortable talking to the workers, as you noted. The fact that he's like basically insulting this guy and his job during his big soundbite there. But instead, what you saw from a lot of the liberals was just doubling down on insulting Donald Trump for insulting Trump and service workers for the work that they're doing because working at McDonald's is supposed to be something that we look down upon.
Yeah, and the official response from Kamala Harris is in the general direction that should be, which is to say we should raise the minimum wage.
Mm-hmm.
She hasn't said what we should raise that minimum wage to, not even the $15, which had been the consensus sort of liberal opinion for like a decade now. And the minimum wage has not been raised since the first months of Obama in office.
Mm.
And it's weird to look back. It was raised twice when Bush was in office.
Yeah.
And the reason that it hasn't is because there's a war on those workers. And so now all of a sudden, flash forward, nobody can pay for rent. Nobody can pay for any of this stuff. It's because, you've been frozen in time in terms of wages.
And it's a stunt that I think, when you watch the actual video, it's goofy, blah, blah, that's kind of typical of Trump. But what it sort of, the images from it, people have been sort of trying to make fun of his outfits that he was wearing. No, I mean, I think people see that as Trump actually not putting on a show and actually like going out there and, being who he is, warts and all.
Bill Clinton did that shit, and those same liberals. Bill Clinton ate Big Macs while in the White House in the 90s, and the same liberals ate that shit up like crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. You know what I mean? It's just like what you need to do with Trump is be able to point out his lack of care, like on the class front. But instead, they want to make a bunch of jokes about him being a felon, right? Or the weirdest thing ever, which was this kind of obsession with that he didn't actually work a shift at McDonald's. And it's just like, all right, guys, are we serious right now? Of course he did it. He fucking
I signed a W-2 and everything.
Him. You're not going to just have him working a shift at McDonald's. Yes, of course it's goddamn staged. That's like, I don't know. It's just, the thing with Trump that's so frustrating, and we can get into this in a second, is that Trump is so beatable, particularly on these issues. The fact of the matter is that there's no reason that somebody like Donald Trump, a bloated billionaire from Manhattan, should be able to stand up as somebody who's like thinking about the plight of the common man, right? The only reason he can do that effectively at all is because of the inept decisions of the leadership of the Democratic Party. Because while Trump is doing this stunt and saying goofy things and not, hitting a home run on all of it, what we're getting from Kamala Harris is something that nobody in the country, other than maybe some publishers who are going to publish her book after the fact, likes, which is campaigning with Liz fucking Cheney. Just like as far off from everyday people's like wants as you can get.
Yeah, exactly. And now all of a sudden we're concerned about Michigan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, on this, I wanted to pull up this really good study that just got released from the good folks at the Center for Working Class Politics. Dustin Guastella, previous guest of Left Reckoning, somebody who you should definitely be following and reading all their work, put this piece out in The Guardian on the results from the Center for Working Class Politics. And it says, to win, Harris should talk more about working class needs and less about Trump. And this sort of goes through the study that they did at the Center for Working Class Politics, where they worked with the polling firm YouGov, pulled a representative sample of 1,000 eligible voters in Pennsylvania between the 24th of September and the 2nd of October. And Matt, what messages do you think really resonated with everyday folks? Do you think they liked it when they started talking about Liz Cheney and bipartisanship and the threats to democracy?
Yeah, I think they loved it when you said, hey, care about democracy, and also your ally in this is Liz Cheney. I think people were very moved by that.
Yeah. In line with our past research, we found that economically focused messages and messages that employed a populist narrative fared best relative to Trump-style narratives. Interesting. About Biden's competence, immigration, corrupt elites, critical race theory, inflation, election integrity, and tariffs. No surprise there. Meanwhile, Harris's messages on abortion and immigration fared worse than any of the economic or populist messages we tested. Again, no big surprise there. Yet no message was as unpopular as the one we call the, quote, Democratic threat message. Much like Harris's recent rhetoric, this message called on voters to defend our freedoms and our democracy against a would-be dictator and in the form of Trump. It named Trump as a criminal and a convicted felon and warned of his plans to punish his political enemies. Of the 7 messages we tested, each relating to a major theme of the Harris campaign, the Democratic threat message polled last. Among blue-collar voters, a group that leans Republican, the Democratic threat message was a whopping 14.4 points underwater relative to the average support for Trump's messages. And even among, and this last bit here, and then I'll throw to you, Matt, even among professionals, the most liberal of the bunch, and the group that liked the message the best, the democracy threat message barely outperformed Trump's messages.
Yeah, I mean, and this is what we've all seen. Joe Biden was going to lose worse than Kamala by running exclusively on that, and how bad this guy is, and we can't let him do it. And the sort of Chicken Little skies falling, which, look, I don't downplay. I always think it's bad when Republicans have a large amount of power. Like, I'm not happy about that. But I think in terms of like understanding that occasionally that's going to happen in this fucking country, and B, what's persuasive to a person who's just checking in on politics because they're going to have to vote pretty soon. It's like, it's not persuasive. And so there was a brief moment, I don't know if it's just coincidentally that Kamala was looking the strongest in the polls, but when she picked Tim Walz, and it was all, these guys aren't super scary, they're actually weird. Mm-hmm. And I don't know, I maybe it's something else, but that was, I think, to me, a better way to approach it than like, oh my gosh, we need every help we can get. Even this guy from the Heritage Foundation, they touted a guy from the Heritage Foundation. The Heritage Foundation is the responsible for the personnel of Project 2025. Like, they're undercutting. Like, it's one thing to even say democracy, but like anybody who cares about that concept to any degree that's going to vote for a Democrat, and you're bringing Liz Cheney out there, like, what the fuck are we doing?
It's bizarre, and I think it's just undeniable at this point. That the fact of the matter is that as you see, this really great investigative work that they do at the Center for Working Class Politics, where they take a more serious and methodological approach to looking at how messaging actually affects working class voters, right? So actually presenting different kind of statements, different kind of arguments, and looking at how effective certain ones are versus other, which is something very different than a lot of the crap that you get out there. And it shows a very, very different political picture than the mainstream media one that we've been getting now about Kamala Harris, which is that, wow, isn't it great that she's created this grand coalition? It shows how much people trust her, when it actually is coming off to a lot of people as a reason maybe not to trust her, maybe not to like her. And you could talk about all this other kind of stuff, but it's window dressing at the end of the day. When we know the reality is this, is that working class economic populist messaging works with working class voters. The Democratic Party's decision not to pursue that has everything to do with the fact that their donor base and the people who are calling the shots behind the scenes for that party have no interest in helping out those workers. So when you see all these folks out there who are saying, I don't trust the Democrats anymore. Well, how can you blame people when they live through Bill Clinton's lies and disappointment and Obama's lies and disappointment, when now they're not even doing it anymore? And they're saying, front page of the New York Times today, or the New York Times today, Jamie Dimon saying, I would love to have a job. I'm supporting Harris. I would love to have a job in administration. This is as clear as day. And it's a real failure of political vision from the Democratic Party, which seems to have learned nothing from the past 8 years about what to do to beat Donald Trump.
Yeah. One final note on this, and I haven't shown you this yet. There's something called the Alien Super Show. I'm not super familiar with it.
I forgot about this.
But they're apparently a comedy show, and I saw Kyle Kalinske retweet this. This is AI, and I fully respect anybody who takes a more anti-AI stance and is offended by even playing this. I think it is funny as fucking hell. It is somebody who these guys said, "What's the prompt? we asked AI for an accurate depiction of Trump actually working at McDonald's. And I think why I like this because it kind of shows AI is like fucking ridiculous. But anyway, here is let's see if yeah, here it is.
Oh my God. Yeah, I would have loved it.
And people, you'll want to watch this on YouTube.
Yeah, you're just
folks.
gonna have to. All right.
But yeah,
Lord.
So
these technologies are pretty wonderful. For all the way from the AI hallucinations to these gloves that allow you to get the French fries to the people without having to touch it with your hands.
Eric Schmidt said that AI, look, we're not those pesky caps of CO2 or whatever, but we can do AI, and I mean, pretty good consolation. Am I right, guys?
Consolation. The world will burn in a fiery ball, but you do get to watch Trump turn into water as he marches through an SUV.
Now I see Trump flapping around like a chicken.
It's beautiful. Well, shall we get to our guest, Matt?
Yeah, let's do this. Is a great conversation. We just wrapped up before the show with Courtney. Anything you want to preface it with?
Well, one, people should be subscribing to Damage Magazine to read Courtney's piece. It's right here, Damage. There's a link below. Damage Magazine is one of the best publications out there right now. I'm a huge fan. And people, don't forget, right after that conversation, we'll be going to the postgame, patreon.com/leftreckoning to get access to it. You're not going to want to miss it. If you're only watching these main shows, you're only getting half of what we're doing here on Tuesday night. We have a lot of fun, watch some videos, chat with the audience there. So you're going to want to join us, patreon.com/leftreckoning.
Yeah, we have some for the post game, folks. This is our sales funnel. We're going to get into these guys who teach you how to make a lot of money on the upscale luxury Instagram page.
Round two of upscale luxury.
If you don't see Dave and I back here talking about politics and shit, it might be because we are making like up $5,000 to $10,000 a month. So yeah, we'll check that out. Patreon.com/leftreckoning.
All right, folks. But without further ado, we're going to talk to Courtney Rawlings about motherhood. Can the left be better when it comes to showing up for moms? We're going to talk about daycare and much, much more. You're going to want to see it. So stick around. Welcome back, Left Reckoners. David Griscom here, joined as always by my good friend and comrade, Matt Leck. How you doing, brother?
I'm doing well, David. Good to be with you.
Yeah, man. I'm really excited to be speaking with our guest as well, Courtney Rawlings, who, among many other things, is a mother, but is also a really great writer, thinker, and the author of this excellent new piece in Damage Magazine. Let me put this up here. Sorry. There we go. A Damage Magazine on daycare. Courtney, thank you so much for joining us on Left Reckoning.
Oh my gosh, thanks for having me. I'm so excited to talk about daycare, which I'm obsessed with now.
Yeah, I mean, I really, really enjoyed, again, not to be too much of a shield for Damage Magazine, y'all, but you should be buying the print edition of it because it's really beautiful inside. And there's also great pieces in here. And this third edition is about mothers and motherhood, something that I think actually, unfortunately, on the U.S. left at least, I think sometimes leftists kind of struggle to speak about and talk about properly. But we can get into that in a little bit. This piece is about daycare. And one of the taglines I saw for maybe we should just leave daycare to the libs. Courtney, why should we leave daycare to the libs?
Wow, I mean, do you have like 6 hours of your time? There's a lot of good reasons. Look, the main reason that I got into writing the piece is obviously I became a mom. I don't think it's something that you really think about unless you have a kid, and then all of a sudden you're like, I have to go to work, and how am I going to do that? And there's really, in the U.S. and most of the West in general, there's really one answer, and that's daycare. And because I had a lot of time in my hands at the time, as a new mom, I was very lucky. I didn't have to immediately send Leo to daycare. I didn't have to immediately do a lot of things for a lot of reasons. And I was able to become almost like insanely fixated on child rearing in general, which I think is just something that a lot of moms do right after having a kid, right? Like you become kind of like weirdly obsessed with the minutia. And I became obsessed with the minutia, a lot of different things. And daycare was one of a few things that I became obsessed with, largely because, yeah, like you need to figure out what to do with your kid once you do return to work. And I noted, like, I joined like a mom's group when I first, which I recommend if you're an expecting mother or even a new mom. I do recommend this because, you know, most of you don't have family around, but I joined a new mom's group and everyone there was pretty much like on a 3 or 4 month maternity leave policy. And these are people working at Amazon and Facebook. And the number one thing that they were most nervous about was that they have to return to work when their kid was just, you know, a few months old. And that was something I just hadn't thought about, because when you have a kid, you don't really realize how anxiety inducing separating from that child is going to be, especially when they're so young. And a 3 and 4 month-old kid is so new to the world, and you are so new to having this kid. And so, and kind of knowing that every one of these women was going to have to send their kids to daycare, I just started kind of thinking about it myself. Like, am I going to send Leo to daycare? And I'll just, you know, kind of get to the jump of it, which is what I found was incredibly disheartening. Daycare has hugely negative effects, especially behavioral, but also mental, physical, really long-term effects on children. And it comes down to this kind of early separation that happens, especially in America and especially in the West. But, you know, we'll just focus on the American context because I know it best. But that early separation, yeah, just has detrimental mental and physical effects on the child later on. And I had long been advocating for low-cost childcare. I think, and I still think it's so incredibly important to most Americans, because we can get into the cost of daycare in general. But one thing I wasn't prepared to find was just how so many of these children were going to face a kind of lifetime of mental hardship, and that was because of this early broken bond between mother and child. And I don't know why we don't talk about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think you know, the worries that you sort of highlight in your piece and right now are really important. And you know, maybe to sort of, I think our audience is probably at different stages in their life, right? Full spectrum here. You know, maybe we could talk a little bit about, like, you know, like daycare as it exists in the US, right? As like a system. I mean, how typical is that in like human, you know, history? You know, like that kind of separation of like a mother from the very, very young child.
Yeah. Well, I'll just throw in a little bit of history really quickly, because I think it's worthwhile, and then it kind of will frame what's happening right now. So kind of earliest iterations of kind of institutional daycare that we have start in the kind of early turn of the century, 19 teens, mostly in Chicago, where there were socialist dissidents kind of wreaking havoc. And, you know, the threat of, you know, governmental intervention into the lives of workers was like a real live one to the kind of ruling class there and the burgeoning middle class. And so there were new institutions. The Hull House is one of the most famous institutions, kind of developed out of the middle class women's, you know, interest in preserving the status quo, the capitalist status quo. And one of the things that they offered to help quell the social unrest was daycare, right? We'll take care of your kids so that you can actually make even more money. We can send moms to work more quickly. We'll have less infant deaths. I mean, a lot of women at this time, I mean, if you want to know, you know, the recipe for communism, it is truly, you know, children at home dying. I mean, this was a huge issue that the Whole House helped solve. A lot of women had to leave their kids, chained to the bedroom or their crib while they went off to work. And so the Whole House did come and give this kind of needed social good, right? I mean, it's like all the social goods we have in this country. It's a it's a nonprofit, basically. It's like an early nonprofit, and the Whole House comes in and does that, and really it benefited the workers, and it benefited the middle class women because it kind of quelled the social unrest and helped poor families double their incomes by sending more women to work. And that's really how daycare, as we know it today, is introduced to the American public. Now, there's a lot of questions about what motherhood and child rearing look like before daycare. And we can get into that, but it's not also what we would think of as the stay-at-home mom today. So we're not talking about a woman alone in her home taking care of 1, 2, 3, 6, I don't know how many children, and doing it all, washing, the 1950s kind of vision of the housewife that we have. It certainly wasn't that either. The from what I understand, the kind of typical child rearing practices that brought us to the present day, to the Industrial Revolution, revolved around kind of kinship, parenting, the village. We love talking about the village. And it did really mean moms still worked, right? But they could bring their kids along to their, basket weaving carts. I don't know. I'm making this all up, right? But it was a more of a universe where that was more child friendly. Once the Industrial Revolution comes about, right? You can't bring your kid to the factory. It's just not safe. And bosses aren't certainly not going to allow kids into the factory. So we have, the introduction of modern day daycare.
Yeah. So I think that this is getting to kind of the crux of your argument here too, is that daycare as we know it and experience it in the United States is really an institution that is set up not even, and again, this is not to demonize people working in these industries, but it's set up to fill a need, and that need is created by the kind of economic pressure on, for example, both parents having to work, right? Both parents needing to produce value in the American economy at large. So it's something that you can't really separate out from this tension here, right? And that's sort of why we as leftists should think maybe a little bit differently about this institution. Is that fair enough?
Yeah, I mean, so that's the background, right? That's a pretty dark background, and of course, right? We're talking about an industry that exists for the necessity of taking care of children while women return to work. But the real and I don't think that's an issue, on its own. The issue happens when we talk about how quickly and how detrimental the effects of how quickly mothers are separated from their children, and then how detrimental that is to the health of the children and to the health of mothers. So I did a lot of researching, obviously, for this piece. I think it's pretty packed full of just depressing statistics. And one of them is just how low quality American daycare is. And that even when you look at the higher quality daycare, you still see pretty negative effects on children. But sorry, I just jumped ahead kind of quickly when we think of where we want to start. But hold on.
I mean, you were mentioning about how, and I think this is actually a really important thing to highlight here too, is that Americans in particular, American mothers are separated from their children for the benefit of the class, the capitalist class in America. And I'm sorry, I'm not to be too much agitational, but that's something that I think we should be able to speak about, using those kind of terms too. It's parents are being separated from their from their children at absolutely critical parts of their development, in order for that parent to go and again produce value for McDonald's Corporation or right. Whatever. I mean, this is a pretty extreme thing that is happening every day.
Well, we're really the only country without any maternity leave. I think there's one country in the entire world that also doesn't have. It's some small island though. I genuinely, there's no other country on the face of this planet that treats mothers worse than the United States. And so on average, 25% of all mothers have to return to work within 2 weeks of giving birth. Okay. College educated mothers fare a little bit better, right? I think they get about 6 weeks on average before returning to work. But again, when I was, during this mothering group, we're talking about 3 to 4 months of paid leave. And all of these women were so thankful that they had those 3 to 4 months. But I'm here thinking, I got a full year off. And again, that's for a lot of really different reasons. If you want to know, like the personal is like, I just finished my dissertation. I didn't have a job, right, to go back to. I was still on the market. I've since started working, but I didn't start working until my baby was a year old, right? So I had this whole year that I got to spend with him. The idea of separating from him at 2 weeks, again, that's 25% of mothers. At 6 weeks, most college graduate mothers. At 8 weeks, at 12 weeks, any of that, we're talking weeks old. This human being is weeks old. And on the whole, I think it's over 60% of those children who are separated from their mothers at such a young age are sent to these institutional daycares, which have a host of issues, right? But once we even add in things like home daycares or a mixture of a nanny and a daycare, we're saying the vast, vast, vast majority of American children are being raised at weeks old by employees. Normally employees that are insanely underpaid. In 2011, okay, this is an old stat, right? It was like around $19,000 a year. That's how much an average daycare worker was making. I mean, there are a host of issues with American daycare systems, but the number one issue with American daycare systems, in my opinion, is that by and large, we're talking about a daycare system that's looking at brand new infants, 2, 3, 6-week-old children. And that does irreparable harm, not only to the child who can't build a relationship with his mother or her mother, but also the mother who has to push away this kind of, look, people talk about mother's intuition. That is a magical, insane kind of, whatever. But if you're pushing away the feelings of sadness that you're inevitably going to feel separating from your child, maybe alarm bells should be going off, right? Maybe that's not the healthiest thing. But in America, that's the only answer for mothers, is to ignore this pain that you're feeling from separating your child, being thankful for the corporation that if you got any time off in the first place, and paying tens and tens of thousands of dollars to send your child to daycare. And what you see if you look at the data is that's not working for Americans. 1 in 6 children ages 2 through 8 years old have been diagnosed with like a mental health issue in the United States. And obviously I'm not saying that's daycare. That would be insane. But it's certainly if that many of our children are suffering, we have to look at like what's going wrong here. And one possible issue, given a host of other research that shows the ills of daycare, not just in America but across the West, is that it does have long-term harmful effects. I mean, there's high turnover, right? I've talked about how there's so many underpaid workers there. They can be very dangerous places for children. Typically, children are the majority of American daycares are considered fair, so they're not even like high quality. And when we measure fairness, we're talking about the adult to child ratio. So a lot of these daycares have some 3 or 4 people watching 11, 12, 15 infants who need a lot of attention, a lot of love. And when you add in the turnover, those children, right? So there's the worker side, which is, obviously no 2 or 3 people can watch 11 babies. One person can hardly watch one person. I've done it. It's fucking nuts. I can't believe I had to do it alone for so much. I have a great husband, but I'm saying like, I did the lion's share of the child rearing, and it was incredibly hard to do alone. I can't imagine, being thrown into an institution where you have like 11 other kids to watch. And the basically the data that I looked up bears out that this system that we're working with right now is really harmful to both mothers and children.
When it comes to like the care though, the like
Certainly shouldn't be. It has, it does irreparable harm. But yeah, so there's one really great study from 2006, 2007. It kind of depends on what you're reading, what date they cite. I'm going to go with '06. It's this great study. It's really the only really robust study of American daycares. And what they found, I think it's the national, for anyone interested, it's in the piece, but it's like the National Institute for Child Education and Human Development, something like that. But I'll just call it the 2006 study. So this 2006 study found that, look, childcare or these daycare facilities can do some good, right? So really high quality daycare, really high quality, which is between 6 and 10% of all daycares. Yeah, you can see some benefits to the child. They can show signs of language acquisition earlier. That's like one example. But over the long term, even those children at very, very high quality daycares, those kind of early benefits taper off. Because across daycare settings, children who attended daycare, especially for long hours, experience higher levels of criminality, higher levels of ADHD, mental health disorders, signs of dissatisfaction in life. They're worse in school, more likely to be diagnosed with ADHD, the whole gamut of issues that we see with children today. But we can stick with kind of talking about this bifurcation of quality. High quality childcare, and again, that's the ratio of child to the amount of children in the classroom, is nearly impossible to find in the U.S. It's a pretty unregulated industry, with suggestions rather than regulations on how these daycare centers should be organized, how many people have to work there, certainly how well they have to be paid. I just was reading an article, for instance, about this kind of high quality, like they say they're high quality childcare institution that's like across Seattle. It's called like KinderCare or something like that. They just instituted a new policy where their workers may be working at your facility one day and a different facility the next day. They're on rotation, kind of like how if, I don't know, this is like such a niche comparison, but if you've ever worked at like a food court or at a university, in the university food court, you're normally hired by like a company, and then you might work at Starbucks or Chipotle, with a sushi restaurant, depending on the day. That's how they're treating these workers. So we're talking about like really low paid, but really highly needed workers who are thrown into a pretty difficult situation. And the quality of care in the United States is just abysmal.
And I mean, like, I know this isn't, I'm not the first person to say this, but, the irony of this, or the cruel irony, the nastiness of this is that, this is something, though, that does continue to eat up more and more and more of people's wages in this country. Yeah. While the people doing the labor and doing the work are among some of the most abused and exploited workers in this country. So, it really is something that I think touches on to a lot of fundamental, problems with our system here. So somebody may say that, maybe the system we have here isn't really working, but this kind of model that we're getting pushed by, the libs, right? On daycare might be able to alleviate some of these kind of things. I mean, what do you say to that? And how can we sort of envision something a little bit different?
Yeah, it's a hard question. I think the hardest part about writing this piece is that I didn't want people to feel like I was putting down the decision to send their kids to daycare. I think, when I was talking about people returning to work and all that, we're talking about, going back to work in 2 weeks, not because you can't fucking wait to go back to work.
Yeah.
Because that was already an unpaid, more often than not, we're talking about unpaid leave policies. And so it makes sense, right? Most people's politics are in lockstep with capital, and including the left's often. Okay, and that's again not a judgment. It's just a fact that okay, there's this issue. Moms have to go back to work. We got to get them back. Go back. Let's get childcare. Let's make it low cost. Let's make it maybe more highly regulated. Let's get more. Let's regulate how much these people are being paid. For instance, the daycare workers who are essential and important part of our, ecosystem.
Mm-hmm.
But even when with at high quality daycares, kind of like I mentioned, these issues with long-term negative effects don't disappear, right? And the effects on mothers don't disappear just because you're paying. There's this new program in Canada that some people can qualify for, where I think it's $5 a day to send your kid to a pretty high quality daycare. France has something very similar, but they do not. They don't. Their rates of mental illness amongst children are lower.
What are they sending their kids as early as we are in the U.S.?
Yeah, so they're not sending their kids as early as we are in the U.S. They were talking about people who or countries that have, pretty robust maternity leave policies, worker protections, and in the United States, the answer of what should we do with childcare? I mean, what should we do about sending kids, moms having to return to work, and the answer being let's have low cost childcare without talking about the mother and the effect on the child and robust maternity leave policies seems, I don't know, kind of.
Well, Courtney, I mean,
I'm mentally ill. I don't know.
I mean, I think that there is an issue here that the way that it's talked about, because I think that probably having some form of government subsidy or ability to sort of help people out cover these astronomical costs is probably better than not doing anything about it.
Yeah.
But it does sort of line it up in a way that, the focus, and such an American way to look at this problem is that okay, this is like a cost externality, right? This is this is cutting into wages a little bit too much and just making people upset versus I think having the larger conversation, the important conversation of one, what are the consequences of this system to our children? And two, whether or not we think that we want to live in a country that we are having parents pulled away from their children again at this very, very critical point in their development, right? So instead of looking at those other things, what is the effects on this for kids and what's the social effect on this for parents? It is this kind of okay, well, this the cost of this is getting too high, so we got to figure out how to fix the market in the U.S. basically around this.
Yeah, I mean, and they're not wrong. I don't remember if this is in the damage piece, but people are paying $40,000-$50,000 a year to send their kids to daycare, and you watch these insanely sad videos so the one common TikTok video. This is just my own little entry into the sadness that is American daycare system, the American childcare system. Is you'll see this mom being a day as a working mom. And she goes into, makes her coffee, gets herself ready, goes into her baby's nursery, and takes them directly from the crib and puts them into their car seat, where they will then go from the car seat to the car, often before the sun comes up, right? We're talking about people getting to work pretty early, right? So their kid probably arrives at daycare around 7 a.m., 8 a.m., and is there until, 5, 6 p.m. when they get off work. And so then you're talking about, okay, how long does that mom get to spend with her kid, right? So you're watching this video oh, great, you have a whole routine for getting your kid to daycare. When do you get to hang out with them? When do you get to bond with this, 2-month-old? It's the hours after work, right? Maybe 1-2 hours after work. And what's crazy to me is typically, in an earlier period, the middle class wouldn't have suffered this injustice. Only the poor would. And then I'm telling you, no one would be talking about daycare. But now it's crept into not just middle class households, but upper middle class households who are paying $6,000 a month, for instance, oftentimes more than their mortgage, certainly more than their rent, to send their kids to daycare so that they can work to pay for that daycare, to pay, and then to pay for their mortgage, to put food on the table. What's interesting to me is that no one has pushed back onto how did we get here in the first place. And instead we're really focused on cost, which is of course a crazy issue. It's of course a disgusting issue. But I think about my friends who are working at Facebook, Amazon, or I guess it's called Meta, Meta, Amazon, I don't know, whatever, these big, huge tech companies getting paid.
Call it whatever you want.
And they're spending 2 hours a day with their 1-year-old. And that is not the sign of a healthy society. I hate being like a data person. Like, that's not what I wanted to do when I set out to write this piece. But it's the easiest way to express to someone that there's something really wrong happening here. And daycare is clearly hurting these children and hurting parents, or mothers in particular. But there is an allergy to talking about mothering in particular. And exactly why we've developed that allergy is a complicated one that I don't fully think I have the answer to.
Well, we sorry, go ahead, Matt.
I mean, I was just going to say, like, this conversation seems like it's been so pathologized throughout the years. Like, I remember hearing about the satanic panic as sort of like an outgrowth of anxiety towards an increase in daycare. And you also, it's not like we don't care about kids. We're concerned about them on TikTok or if there's any sort of trans stuff. But these sort of fundamental things about where we send them all day, we're not even talking about. Like, I mean, do you have any idea of how we get so off track on these issues?
Yeah. Look, if I'm about to tread into dangerous waters, okay? so buckle your seatbelts. No, I'm just kidding. But look, from what I can tell, okay, looking at the literature and also just looking at how people talk in normal everyday life, the issue with mothering and the reason things like the satanic panic are tied to things like daycares, we're talking about women working, which was at one point, right, kind of odd, kind of an oddity for the poor, who send their kids to the Hull House, who abuse their children, right? Then it became more of a middle class thing. And it's become more and more, not just normalized, expected. And the economy reflects that expectation. You cannot, first of all, you can't, if you're a millennial, like, you're out of luck buying a house, move to Texas, I guess. I don't know. 100%.
Don't do that, but all right.
Or whatever, like, you're just not going to own a house. But there are a lot of economic factors that make it absolutely necessary that both parents are working pretty much full time all the time in order to maintain any decent quality of life in the United States. If you want to live in a city, it's even more expensive. And so you're talking about a pretty difficult thing, which is combines kind of gender and the history of feminism and how we think about progress with women in particular. And once you touch that, you really, I think a lot of people get nervous that they're flirting with the right wing. But here's the thing about the right wing is they have really educated, smart people talking on their side too. And they're also critical of daycare. That's actually how I got the original idea for the piece. Is I was listening to a right-wing coded, I don't actually know if she's like fully right-wing podcast, and they were talking about daycare, and I was like, why doesn't the left talk like this? Why doesn't the left kind of question things like, when did we go from encouraging women to work so that they could like divorce abusive people to sending women back to work after 2 weeks after giving birth? Like, how did we get there? That's not humane. And there are material facts about being a woman, giving birth, and then being a baby that cannot be overlooked and dismissed as like outside of the realm of the leftist imagination.
I mean, I think that, you open up the piece, talking about something in Ireland right?
That
Where
was a wild choice on my behalf. Yeah.
well, I mean, it sets it up in a way to to really drive this point home where you know basically there was a big push to change gendered language in the CARES Act there, and that's something that like for American leftists, having that not go through would be like seen as like a massive loss. Yeah. But you sort of note that well, in Ireland they're doing a lot more to protect those people who they're explicitly naming, and this kind of thing. It's like the American left, I think, is really terrible about talking about families. I think they're, not just mothers. Yeah. I mean, just families in general, because I think they've sort of taken the right wing bait that talking about these things are, belong to the right, belong to like the reactionary class. I mean, you'll see things like, not that we need to open this one up, but every once in a while on Twitter, you'll see some kid decide that, right now is the right time to start talking about abolishing the family.
Oh, God.
Which is, one of the worst things that you can be talking about if you're trying to build a mass movement in a country right now. We're like
full surrogacy now.
Yeah, we're having that's a whole other bit of problems. But like, at a time right now where like a lot of people feel tremendous anxiety because they feel alone. They feel like they don't have the access to be a part of a family. And instead of the left wing argument being like, look at all of these things.
We have all these mass daycares that, underpay their employees and overpay the owners. Okay. This is a grotesque situation. And then the response is something like, I'm just not going to have children, right? Or, we should abolish the family or whatever. And these are, of course, personal choices, whatever. But if you think about it just for a little bit of a second, maybe this huge kind of fear of the family has more to do with an economic point. The facts on the ground, the facts that people don't want you to have time to have families. Families are increasingly becoming, kind of the hobby horse of the wealthy. Maybe we should be exploring that rather than demonizing it as a right-wing talking point. And being, brave enough to talk about things like, I don't know, giving birth and being a woman and having children who are, children, right, are completely out of leftist talking points. And often, in my experience, when I'm talking to leftists about children, they're talking about like, well, the poor people. There's still this assumption that it's poor people with children, which is less and less the case. It's actually, we're talking about middle class people and children. And so the way that the left talks about children also tends to be like, well, let's just put them in daycare. And I'm like, okay, that's very like you turn of the century coded, right? It's like, oh, it's just the poor, they need work, we whatever, until we can get them higher, until we have full, what's it called, champagne communism now, or whatever. I'm like, no, we're talking about like right now. We need like, for all the classes across, an immediate kind of push point that could bring a lot more people together and have us talk about real economic change, is talking about protecting things like maternity leave, something we don't have at all. Thinking about protecting, who wants to have a kid if you have to go back to work in 2 weeks? Why? Of course not. That's a completely normal response to a horrible option, or non-option. There's really no choice as to whether or not you're going to have a kid now. If you really know going into having a child that you're going to have to go back to work, let's even say 4 months later, that is a terrifying reality. And more likely than not, that's going to be an unpaid 4 months. It's going to be an unpaid 3 weeks. It's going to be an unpaid 6 months. Taking a year, you're going to lose your job. Okay. We have no protections for families, especially mothers, especially these young children. And so I just don't think hyper fixating on childcare as if child rearing is not something that everyone should have the opportunity to do is a worthwhile focus.
Yeah, my brother recently had a second child, and he's in North Dakota, so it's a little bit easier to buy a house there. And he actually works for a place with a generous, I think it's like month, or maybe it was even 2 months. For the first one, I think he might have just took extra time off. But the way he talks about that time it seems like the most maybe graspable utopia. Like you're not under a capitalist. I mean, is job paid for it, but that's why it should be not through the job, but maybe a government program, so people aren't thanking their bosses for this. But like that, you have this space of time where you're not under a boss and your priority is your family. Like that seems just such an obvious thing to emphasize as this is a kind of future or a glimpse at a future that we want.
First of all, herein lies, to me, the real dark spot is fucking being so stoked. I'm sorry I keep cussing. I hope that's okay. I think I've heard this before. Okay. Is the 8 weeks, right? Oh, I got 8 weeks paid. I didn't have to think about my boss. I got this completely protected time. 8 weeks, 2 months. We need to really like, if that's good for your boss, that means it's not good for you. Okay. Let's start there. If, they can afford 4 months, that means that's what they're allowing, to kind of keep you around, right? We need to be demanding a lot more, especially if we want to take seriously the health of children and mothers in particular. I'm talking year. Let's push for 2 years. Okay. And then we'll negotiate down to a year. So that's where I would start with that. That really, that's a very common story, right? I'm just so lucky I got 8 weeks paid. I'm so lucky I got 6 weeks paid. I'm so lucky I got 2 weeks unpaid. I'm like, Jesus fucking Christ. This is not normal. This is like not a normal, headspace to be in. The left needs to get out of there, first of all. And then of course, it should certainly not be dependent on one's job. So the United States, from I think it's the early 90s or something like that, passed a law, first time for everything, protecting, parental leaves, really maternal leaves. I mean, it's like 12 weeks unpaid. 59% of women do not qualify for that 12 weeks of unpaid leave that the federal government has so graciously set aside for us, for a variety of reasons. I mean, the quality, what is it? What's the phrase? The something to entry? The
barrier
to entry. Thank you. Is so high. So high. You have to have had that job for a certain amount of time. You have to be a full-time worker rather than a part-time worker. You basically can't have any complications with your birth. I mean, there's a whole set of institutional boundaries to getting that 12 weeks unpaid for the federal government. So
then, I mean, imagine a lot of people in certain kinds of work bringing that up to their boss, and having them be receptive to it, regardless if it's legal or illegal. And then also, the kind of pressure, the fundamental pressure that, women experience too, is that like, oh, well, if you're going to be out of work for so long, why should I have you in this, position, right? Which is
I mean, there are no job protections, even if you do take, say, like a more robust leave. Say you got 4 months, say they guarantee you those 4 months. It does not guarantee you keep your job for those 4 months. And one thing that I always go back to when I'm talking about daycare and where I talk about maternity leave in particular is the woman who, checks you out at Rite Aid or at the 7-Eleven or works the front desk or whatever, those women got 2 weeks unpaid. Who is watching their child 2 weeks later? How are they feeling? Did they get, how often after giving birth you get sick? You're so fucking tired. If you had a C-section, you can barely walk. 2 weeks later, you're basically still pregnant. You certainly look pregnant. For months, by the way, after. It's fucking, It's not an easy thing that you just go and like hop out a baby, especially today when a lot more women are having babies later on in life. And I cannot stop thinking about those women who then not only are making minimum wage, but then are paying almost their entire paycheck to these really low quality daycares. So I've talked about how bad high quality daycares are. You can't wrap your head around these low quality daycares. They're dangerous. Oftentimes they they don't have anyone looking in to make sure that they have even like fire codes, stuff like this. You hear horror stories about especially in-home childcare, which has benefits, I think, to the parent because you go and it's the same, grandma and grandpa, watching your kids all day. but there are health concerns. There are, I mean, it's kind of hard to get into because I don't want to get too much into the nitty gritty, but that's where a majority of American children are being raised in their first year of life, rather than next to their mother, next to their parent, next to their grandmother.
Mm-hmm.
They're getting raised in an institution where, under an underpaid worker and in a often dangerous environment.
Yeah. And I mean, no, and I think, I really appreciate the piece, and I appreciate you coming out and talking about it, because, these are kind of conversations that I think on our side, on the left wing side in this country, we've gotten really, really bad at doing, particularly anything that is like straight up for something, right? Because we're talking about something more than just like giving tax credit on daycare. We're talking about, hey, we want to claw back people's, sovereignty and free time and, meaningful stuff. And we're also doing something that I think people on the left are really bad about talking to. It's like gendered work in this country. I mean, from this to some of the other things, pathologies we're talking about, to, the degrowth weirdos, the anti-worker guys, are always going on and on and on and on and on and on about how they want to, destroy every washing machine and dishwasher in the United States, because maybe we could all go and, go to the river like back in the old days and spend a couple hours washing our clothes, and it's like, there's a real disconnect from.
I'm glad I don't know who you're talking about. That's immense. That's crazy.
Oh, dude.
I don't know. Your side of Twitter is dark.
Yeah, it is pretty bad. But I mean, this is what is passing right now for like left-wing thought in the U.S. And I think that's a real shame, frankly.
Yeah, before we let you go, Courtney, is there any place that's doing this well? Like, where's the best place for maternity leave, or alternative to that, if we're, it's all one world under capitalist control? What should be, besides like 2 years, what are some things people should be looking at?
Oof, that's a great question. And it's a hard one to answer, and I'll try and be as brief as humanly possible. First of all, if you can avoid daycare, I would suggest it. I don't think that's possible for most people, but if you can, that's important. It's there's a reason though that a lot of work, bosses like Meta and Amazon are now enforcing return to office policies, and a lot of it has to do with, it was good for moms. Imagine how great that is for a mom. I work from home, and I'm so lucky that I can hire a babysitter part-time. And she and I can kind of tag team raising this kid together. That means Leo sees one person every day, or, one just out of family person every day, and grows used to her, and has people he knows he can rely on. We didn't really get to talk about the nitty gritty of the horrors of daycare and why they're problematic. But one of them is like, children deserve adults that are stable in their life. So anytime you can have and provide for your child a stable parental figure, that's the best anyone can do. Mm-hmm. And there are reasons that the mom might be an ideal parental figure, but there is a long history of there being multiple parental figures it's called allo parenting in the literature, and that's that would be if I was going to propose an ideal kind of vision for America. I'm always nervous to do this, but I would look back to the 1940s, where there was a brief moment where the left imagined cooperative housing, and those cooperative housing units, the very few that were built, often included cooperative daycares run by mothers and their neighbors. And look, that sounds so like, let's all move to the commune with our besties. But I mean like your actual neighbors. I mean the strangers next door. Mm-hmm. I mean, kind of building a universe where children are cared for by everyone in a community. I don't mean trad wife, right? I don't mean like mothers should be stay-at-home moms. If mothers are staying at home, they cannot be alone. That is an impossible and really difficult task. We need to think about, how we build up communities, while also thinking very seriously about how we protect those mothers future prospects of work. So not only should we have robust maternity leaves, we need communities that support those maternity leaves. And then we need return to work policies that are flexible, that recognize that you're still a mother even a year, 2 years later, and need a job that recognizes and celebrates that fact. And there are moments in history where we briefly, toyed around with that concept. And I think the left has a lot to learn by returning to that kind of early history.
Well, I think your piece definitely gets us started in that conversation. People should pick it up in the newest issue of Damage. The left should leave daycare advocacy to the libs. You can get it at damagemagazine.com. Really great pieces also in here. I mean, Dustin Guisella has a great piece. Jen Pan, who you all know from the Jacobin Show and guest on Left Reckoning. Amber Lee Frost has a really great piece on trad wives.
She's the best writer. It's so annoying.
It's a lot of fun. It's a really beautiful publication, so people should pick it up. Courtney, is there anything else? Tell people where they can follow you for sure. You're a great follow on Twitter.
Oh, fuck. What's my...
Oh, I know it. Isn't it?
CK Rawlings, CKAYE Rawlings, RAWLINGS. Please follow me just for fun, just so I have more friends. And yeah, hopefully I'll be writing more soon, so keep an eye out.
Well, we're looking forward to that. There'll be links below to all of that, friends. And thank you very much again, Courtney.
Thanks.
Strummed it out there on the music. Maybe mix that a bit too loud. That was a really great conversation. If two guys who don't have kids say so themselves.
No, it was really great having Courtney on the program, and y'all should definitely subscribe to Damage and read the piece. I have heard some rumors that might be coming out from behind the paywall sometime soon, but why wait? damagemagazine.com to get it. Sorry, I didn't realize how hoarse my voice is. Listen to that interview. Maybe I was yelling too much at the Texas-Georgia game last Saturday night.
I thought you had COVID when you first got on the stream.
We don't have that here. Before, unfortunately, we have to talk a little bit more Texas before we go over the post game. Though, just to talk about this case here, this death row case, Texas still maintains the brutal position of maintaining the death penalty, and the state has been set to execute a man, Robert Robertson, for a devastating event back in 2002, but he was convicted on what is called shaken baby syndrome. And Matt, I don't know if you remember that from when we were younger, but that was a kind of like newer science that was supposed to sort of indicate and be able to recognize abuse leading to the death of children. But it turns out that the science around that has been pretty thoroughly debunked, and it's regarded by many experts to now be what they call "quote unquote" junk science. And I don't know if that's just a Texas term or not, but we have rules here about junk science convictions, and the importance of having those things being reviewed. Right, if there is science that was used to convict somebody. That is something that should be reviewed and taken very seriously, frankly, in any circumstances, but most importantly, in a death penalty case.
I mean, these sorts of forensic type of sciences are open to provision, and there are many types of things to do with, say, audio that are very open to interpretation or whatever. So, like, these laws are very important, and people in this country have been locked up unjustly because of false, like you say, junk science.
And in this case, again, this is a tragic, story. This, a young kid dies, but Robert Robertson also has autism, and a pretty, pretty debilitating form of that, at least when it comes to his communication. And one of the things that was utilized in addition, to the shaken baby syndrome, one of the main focuses of the case was that he didn't sort of seem remorseful enough, or wasn't acting quote unquote typical. Man, this is just a really really difficult situation, and one where there has been a lot of conversation from scientists who have been saying that this conviction over the shaken baby syndrome doesn't seem to be accurate, including one of the main jurors on the case, who's come out and said what they were told and talked about was shaken baby syndrome. And that was what the evidence was, and that is now, a process that is severely in question. And the thing with the death penalty, one of the many reasons, among others, to be against it, is that it's irreversible. And right now, there is a very high stakes limbo going on with this case. So Robertson was scheduled to be executed last week, and it was down to the wire, the execution, because Governor Greg Abbott, who we'll get to in a second, is the person who has the ability to pardon this person, and has refused to do so. So the Texas legislature, and Matt, who runs the Texas legislature?
Tell me.
It's Republicans. The Texas legislature has taken special interest in this case because it is so egregious, and it shows that there are fundamental problems with how we handle these systems in Texas. So the Republican legislature, right? Let's just be very clear who we're talking about here, has ordered a subpoena for Robert Robertson, to compel him to come and testify before the Texas legislature, which that was found at the last minute by Texas courts, to be good enough for a stay for him to come and testify before the legislature. The reasoning literally was, well, he can't come and testify if he's dead. So that move by the legislature has sort of created this limbo here around the Robertson case.
Is there much to expect from the testimony, or is it basically just to extend the time?
The hope is to extend the time, as far as I can tell. There and I mean, Jeff Leach, who people who watch this program follow Texas politics. This guy's a character I've been massively critical about for many bills. This is very very conservative Republican. Has said to the effect that part of the reason they wanted to testify is not only to sort of open this up, but also to sort of look at what has gone wrong. Literally talking to somebody in this experience so that the legislature can try to act to stop this, which is something. And I mean, I could talk, give you a breakdown of what's next and some of the Abbott stuff, unless you had anything that you wanted to sort of note on that.
Well, I guess it is sort of the unexpected part of the story is the principal. And you mentioned, I don't know if I'm spoiling anything, but Dr. Phil making an appearance too. And I think of him as a big psycho. And to find out that he's on the right side of things, it's a little bit disorienting.
Yeah, and I'm not certain too much about the Dr. Phil connection, but he seems to be fairly involved now in Texas around death penalty, cases. And as people probably know, Texas is pretty egregious when it comes to killing people in the name of the state. And this is just the more and more that you hear about the case, the more and more clear that it is that there is undoubtedly something very, very wrong with this science being utilized to sentence this man to death. Adding to the tragedy of this young child's death 22 years ago is the fact that this person has been in prison, very likely wrongfully incarcerated, and now the state looming a death sentence over this person's head. I wanted to just notice a couple. I mean, we'll be watching this. The hope would be maybe the Supreme Court gets involved. They've signaled no, and more and more. Of the hope is just sort of on Greg Abbott. Well, behind the scenes stories here have been a little rough. The Office of the Attorney General, y'all all know that good boy, who is a squeaky clean individual, said, this is from Houston Chronicle, that the move may, quote, have created an end around any criminal laws. This is about Texas legislature subpoenaing, issuing that subpoena for Robertson. The argument from Ken Paxton, which is incredibly rich. If you remember that this is somebody who faced impeachment trial for egregious abuse of public office, sitting here saying that these folks in the legislature try and understand how somebody who is being potentially set up for death by the state, investigating as to why that is happening and what systems failed him. It created an end around any criminal laws. It's just such an egregious thing to say, that the legislature is just going to be personally involved in, sort of getting their friends out of jail. And it's especially rich coming from somebody, again, like Ken Paxton, who is using our public legal system, right? Using our office of the Attorney General to benefit his real estate buddies. The Supreme Court of Texas did issue that temporary restraining order to delay the death. And now there's going to be a lot of legal challenges about about the subpoena. But I wanted to end on this. And that's Greg Abbott, Governor Greg Abbott, whose personal general counsel has submitted an argument that the Texas House Committee has, quote, overstepped its legal jurisdiction with the subpoena of Robertson. And that's from the Texan reporting here. I want to remind people of a story from this state and from this governor that we covered on this program, and a lot of people may remember, which is when Garrett Foster, a U.S. Air Force vet who was attending a Black Lives Matter protest, was walking with his partner and a large group of people when a madman who had been tweeting about how he might be interested in harming protesters and killing protesters drove his vehicle into that group of people, right? Used his vehicle as a weapon against these people. And when Garrett Foster invoked his right as a Texan and as an American to defend his folks, was shot clean dead by Daniel Perry. Daniel Perry faced justice and the Texas legal system, and a jury of his peers said, "You are guilty." And Greg Abbott very publicly got involved in that case, very publicly, very seriously got involved in that case to make a message absolutely clear to right-wing lunatics in this state that if you kill the right kind of person, the state of Texas will have your back and protect you. And now we're seeing that same person here. We're seeing that same person here talk about protecting the separation of powers in Texas government, which is exceptionally rich. If you've been following any of my writing about Greg Abbott over the past 4 years, when this is somebody who has invoked, captured, and grabbed more power and centralized more power in the office of the governor, which is a constitutionally weak governor position in the state of Texas. And he has created all these new powers, including doing things like invoking a disaster declaration over COVID-19 to mobilize millions upon millions and millions of dollars to do his border stunts. This guy's really sitting here talking about, separation of powers and how the legislature needs to respect its authority. Unfucking believable, the gall of these people to talk the way that they do. When what Greg Abbott is more serious about anything here is he doesn't want to look weak and he doesn't want to seem soft to the psycho right wingers who he has emboldened all across this state.
I forgot that he'd pardoned that guy.
So
Jesus Christ.
Like, that's not even a question about fault there. That's just, hey, that's okay if you want to kill left-wing protesters here. And here we are in a state that has junk science laws and all these kind of provisions to protect against the very thing that we're seeing right now. Greg Abbott's like, I'm not going to touch that. Uninterested in touching that. Evil, evil stuff here. Well, folks, if you want to support the program, help us cover these kind of things. Help us cover these kind of stories. I mean, we had it all today. We talked Donald Trump fry meltdown. We talked a daycare, motherhood, whether or not the left has a problem with that. And, about the difficult reality of death penalty politics in the state of Texas. You're not going to get these kind of conversations many other places. So please consider supporting us at patreon.com/leftreckoning. But we're not just asking for a handout. You get 2-to-1 content. You get the main show. You get the post game immediately after these programs. Matt and I take y'all's questions, watch some videos. We got some juicy stuff in this post game, actually. And you also get those Sunday bonus episodes. This last Sunday, we went deep into Ta-Nehisi Coates' revelations about Israel, and also looked deeply at one of his critics, the much beloved Tim Pool. You're getting all this every week. You're getting deep dives into history, theory, politics, all this stuff at patreon.com/leftreckoning. So please consider signing up if you haven't already.
Yeah, join us in just about 10 minutes or so, talking about this way that drop shipping becomes, I mean, and this get rich quick schemes are as old as time, but it's just like, I don't know how people are putting their face to this stuff. It's really embarrassing to me. So,
and maybe if we can stomach it, we'll talk a little bit about a whiny little individual who calls himself Destiny, whatever. I had some very interesting things to say about our buddy recently. All that and more over in the post game, patreon.com/leftreckoning, friends.